So look who's going to be joining us here. Gianna is going to be joining us. She is the president and CEO of Enmax Corporation. Also, Sarah Miller-Wright, the SVP of Customer Care at Shaw Communications. Apparently, she brought some family members with her. This is good. Thank you, Shaw. We also have Meger, who is the president of Western Canada for National Bank Private Banking 1859. And finally, now it's becoming a competition. I love this. This is great. And then finally, Lisa Wassill, who is the branch manager of TD Wealth for TD Bank. And so if you would please join me in welcoming them to our stage. Welcome, welcome. Yes, some of you have a fan base out there, so I'll allow you to get settled, if you will. And I checked with you before if it was acceptable for me to serve you water, and you told me it would be okay. So here we go, just in case you need water while you're on the stage with us today. And my first question to you is a very simple one. Tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get here today? How did you end up on our panel? So Gianna, would you start for us?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking. That's how I ended up on your panel. But why did I end up on your panel? First of all, I just love these events. The energy in the room is something that I know will buoy my spirit for at least a week to come. I know I will think back about this. I love doing these events because it also is a chance for me to give back, but at the same time kind of stay humble. And then, of course, just like many of you in the room, I mean, the opportunity to listen to these brilliant women and to get some of their stories and get inspired by them, I wouldn't miss the chance, so thank you.
Fantastic, thank you.
Absolutely. So it's totally an honor and great to be here to see everyone today. We love coming to these events because we tend to make it a bit of a group outing as well, because it's just so much more fun to come here with some of our friends and colleagues and to hear some great speakers, to listen to a panel like this, to learn a few things and to take some books home, because it's great. It's great to escape kind of the day-to-day and be together in a different kind of format and to learn along the way.
Beautiful. Thanks, Sarah. Megan?
Yeah, I think for me it's about paying it forward. So I have always had the good fortune of having great mentorship in my life, and I always felt that there's one way that I can give back is to put myself in these forums, mentor the young professionals that are moving forward, and also representing grassroots Alberta. I'm a farm girl from rural Alberta, and I think it's important that we cultivate and represent the young women from the other parts of the province.
Thank you. Lisa?
And I'm very excited to be here as well, because it's really an opportunity to share real life experiences. And as you mentioned earlier, Bill, we have some real powerful women who are on the stage today. And it's also really important to hear from everyday women who are here in the city and leading organizations. And of course, with TD being a sponsor, we're very excited about supporting women.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Megan, maybe I can start with you, if I may. A recent article listed the top 100 earning CEOs in Canada, and 99 of them were, men. So, in your opinion, what is holding women leaders back from the upper echelons of corporate leadership? And if I may, and from yours, for you specifically, has gender ever been an issue when you've been trying to get ahead?
Well, I was thinking about my answer, and the short answer is men. No, seriously, I think that it's social and cultural aspects to why we sit in the same position that we have. Only a few years ago, we tried to kind of change that ratio of women in executive roles, and I'm sad to report that it hasn't improved, statistically to speak of in the last few years. But it's more about sponsorship or lack thereof, and we need to do a better job about seeking sponsors or being a sponsor ourselves as we look at the talent pool within our own organizations. Even when you look at the subset of the L2 going into the CEO level, I think this last statistic I read was something that there were 16% of them were women. So we're not doing a good job about sponsoring women, and again, it starts with the culture and the social aspects within the organization. So that would be key. For me personally, Sure, I've had my share of experience. I started in the work world in the 80s, and I was reflecting on that last evening as I was helping my daughter, who's in second year university, on a women's studies class. And she says, "Mom, what was it like in the 80s?" As if it was, the dark ages, right? And you know what? It made me reflect that we have really come a long way. And, there's all kinds of anecdotes that we could all come up with where we were perhaps, treated inappropriately or poorly. And so we have come a long way. There's a lot more awareness, but it's also the responsibility of us that we need to call out bad behavior. And I would like to draw your attention to a recent, it's a few years old now, but a YouTube by Kim Scott from Google about radical candor. And I think that I would challenge you all to read that or to listen to it. It's a way that we can reframe conversations and bring into attention things that we might sometimes shy away from. So a challenge. But yes, I indeed had one individual that sparked my inner fury that I would never ever treat a human being that way, and it's really been a part of my DNA on how I run my business and how I promote the certain culture within my organization.
Wow, wonderful. I mean, it is a really brutal time with hashtag #MeToo, with hashtag I Hear You. So, it's now time, and I think we're seeing that people are just as sad as that experience has been for all of those affected. I think that it's time now that we do start to stand up for each other, regardless of gender, but that we do stand up for each other and say, not on my watch. It can happen. But I think some of the positive ways that we can make some of those things happen, Sarah, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about why is it important that we continue to make room for women in leadership initiatives within organizations? Is it still necessary? Or are we getting closer? What's the time for you?
Well, I think it absolutely is still necessary, and I think not only does the data support that, when you look at, in 2017, leanin.org and McKinsey just released their study, Women in the Workplace, and for the third year in a row, companies are saying that gender diversity in leadership is their top priority, and yet you don't see any of the data supporting that when it comes to C-suite roles, senior VP, VP, all the way down to entry level. Women are still underrepresented. And so if we're not building that corporate pipeline, if we're not breeding our next generation of leaders to be more represented, then we're not going to get there. We can put the commitments up on the board. We can say it's part of, our culture to build a diverse workforce, to build a diverse leadership team. But without action, there's really not going to be the amount of change that we want to see. It's always interesting because, and again, it comes back to perspective, obviously. But when you ask a lot of men in these surveys and in these studies, if there's one woman out of 10 in a leadership position, is that representative? And more than 50% say yes. That's representation. That's what you guys want. Well, not really. Not when we're 52% of the population, right? So, there's that sense of absolutely, the desire to change, the desire to make these commitments at the corporate level, and then there's that next step, which is action. And really, it can be grassroots too. It doesn't always have to be, funded multi-million-dollar programs. It can be things like mentorship programs that are just, providing that opportunity for leaders to meet other leaders, to diversify a little bit within their own networking opportunities internally and externally as well, with lean-in circles, things like that. So still tons of opportunity within organizations for women in leadership programs. It's about the doing. It's about putting in the structures and the opportunities for women to build that corporate pipeline into the future.
And so it would be interesting for me to know truthfully who's holding back, and how can we ensure that people can present themselves forward. Lisa, you shared with us a little bit about that you're actively involved in your Women in Leadership program at TD, and in particular in the area of emotional intelligence, which is so critical. Bridget talked about that. Dr. Shona Charlesworth talked a little bit about that today as well. And so when we've been the greatest, so what has been the greatest learnings for the team that you've worked with in this area?
Well, I think as we all know, emotional intelligence is the ability to identify and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others through your own behavior. So we can put into place great programs for sponsorship and mentoring, but it really is individual responsibility in order to be more aware of your own style and your own behavior. And often people sit up and take notice a little more when they realize that the leading indicator of success in an organization is emotional intelligence. We're all born with a certain level of IQ, and in fact that only represents about 20% of success in organizations. But it's really about EQ, and the fact that EQ can be developed is really a great opportunity for people to be more aware of their behaviors and how their emotions play a part in it. When we talk a lot about the gender differences in emotional intelligence, and women tend to be stronger in the area of empathy or social responsibility, whereas men tend to be stronger in the area of assertiveness and self-confidence. And so as a woman then, be more aware of how to build those skill sets. And as an example in particular, I spend a lot of time talking about self-awareness and self-management, just so you can manage your own emotions and your own behavior. And one example is responding versus reacting. When we react to another person, either to their words or their actions, we're responding with emotion. So we're reacting. Someone says something to you in anger, you react with anger. Whereas when you respond, you're taking the emotion out of it. And it's about really recentering yourself and determining how am I going to respond with the emotion to the side. And so it's really developing those kinds of skill sets that allows us to be more aware and more conscious and move forward.
So thank you for that. So I'll just throw this out off book just for a moment. Are you aware of programs that are really being effective within organizations? And if so, what are the things that are allowing women to rise to the levels that they should be at? Are there any programs that you're familiar with? Like I'm thinking of things like He for She, which is, like so much, you're talking about emotional intelligence, but I find sadly from a man's perspective, sharing here at the Art of Leadership for Women, but men are really ignorant. And I'm just saying we are. And there's so much that we don't know. Jessica and I were walking across to her book signing, and we were talking about even, and last night I had an amazing opportunity with some of our volunteers that I know are here somewhere today to help me understand, and it was the term ladies. And ignorantly, until last night, an amazing volunteer, a group of volunteers here that helped me understand why that term was so inappropriate. So many women I asked told me, no, I don't take exception to ladies at all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's fine. And finally, they helped me understand why that is so condescending and inappropriate.
It's interesting you brought this up because at our lunch table, we were talking about, I'm in a President's Forum group, and I politely pulled one of my colleagues aside. And, I just said to him that when you make reference to professional young women as girls, that's very, very offensive. And to be honest, I don't want to beat him up. I mean, he's a nice guy, but no one ever challenged him. And actually what he said to me was, thanks for your radical candor, but also, no one's ever corrected me, and I didn't know that was offensive. So I think that we're a little bit Canadian about some things, and we need to, speak up appropriately and professionally. We don't want to start, a march down the hallway at work and waving flags, but I think we need to challenge the status quo. And, because we look at these statistical averages of, women on boards, for example, 40% of the publicly listed companies in the country don't even have one woman on the board. That's an atrocity. It's an atrocity.
And what's really insulting is that when you challenge some of those board members, they suggest they're not going to do anything about it either. So how do we make some of these things happen, Gianna?
Well, I'll just add really quickly. I think that I started my career in the gas pipeline industry. I was one of the first women to ever go out on a pipeline, and that was odd to me that I was. I didn't realize I was groundbreaking in that way, but oops, there went the water. That's all right. Groundbreaking, the water goes. But one of the things that I think is important around this discussion is I quickly tried to develop a radar to distinguish between a lack of awareness and intention when things were said. Now, I don't always get it right, but I always start from the perspective if someone says something like ladies or girls, much like you, I never let it stand in usually privately, I will educate them and raise their awareness. Now, and I'll start from the perspective that perhaps they just didn't know. Perhaps no one stopped to inform them or give them a different perspective. But there are times where it's a bit more obvious that it's used to affect, it's used to demean, or it's repeated. And then I take a different action, and then I get a little, much more pointed. And if it's someone that, has in our organization, if they're doing that, quite frankly, it's not tolerated any longer. And I think that's how we can change it. But I think we need to sometimes step back and raise awareness first and give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe they just didn't realize. But once you tell them, then once they know, then I look for a change in behavior.
When I know better, I do better, right? So, Gianna, Enmax itself and the overall electrical industry and landscape are undergoing rapid transformations now. So if we can create some transformation here in this equation, this is leading towards new ways of thinking, though, within your culture. So how can leaders stay agile and effective during times of transformation?
Well, the question is geared towards leaders, but I think I would apply it broadly to just anyone. I think in the electricity industry, we talk about the fact that we are going through the most transformative time in our more than 100-year history. Some will call it disruptive, and certainly I think that's occurring. But I think we are all going through these transformations, these disruptions. And the thing that's most notable about today is the speed at which things are coming at all of us, whether it's in our private lives, the technology in our day-to-day lives, or in our own careers, in our own industry. So my advice or my guidance, I guess, would be in the things that keep me focused on how to manage through this, or how to actually leverage all of this opportunity is, first of all, is stay curious. Become and stay curious. Read things that you wouldn't normally read. Look at industries that you wouldn't normally do. Read that magazine or talk to people outside of your own circle, and be infinitely open to the possibilities that are emerging. The second thing I would say is don't always look for solutions. Actually, as part of being curious is what I'm learning how to do, and a lot of I'm following what some of the expert advice is look for the trends. What are the underlying trends? Don't look for just that one solution set. And the third thing is I think it takes courage. When you see things that either you can change or you want to be a part of, look at it, understand it, be curious about it, but then leap into it and act. One of the sayings that I have on my desk is, imagine what you would do if you knew you could not fail. So we often look at things that are changing, and we look at the downside, and we think about what are all the things that could go wrong, what are the risks. So I gotta understand what's the worst thing that could happen, but then try to spend more time thinking about what an amazing opportunity, or what opportunities lie out there if you're wildly successful. So I think those are pieces. As leaders, we have to be that way. As individuals, even in our home life, we have to embrace some of these changes and stay curious and just get outside your comfort zone every day.
Damn comfort zone. Yeah. What's that about?
It's
not
a
fair.
box. It's not a good box.
Well,
it's easier said than done. I mean, it takes courage.
Well, speaking of courage, Lisa, you've entered into a work field which is, often female leaders are in female-dominated industries. Not you. You took some courage, and how do you engage in a field of mostly men? How do you transform in that field to respond to your leadership? How do you get them to follow, if you will?
Well, I've actually been in a number of industries, and a few of them are very male-dominated. Like Gianna, who said she was the first female to work in a pipeline. My first job out of university was a grain trader. and I work for the largest privately owned grain company in the world. And the first week I was on my job, we went to a national conference of all the grain traders in Canada. I was the only woman at that conference. And so that was many years ago.
So pause for a second. How did that feel when you walked into that room and you were the only woman? How did that feel?
Well, part of it is I was just a newbie, so I was pretty darn excited. But I also felt, honestly, as for the first while, I felt that I had to change who I was. I lost some of my authenticity because I had to change to the norms of the men. And I would say in those olden days in the grain business, it was some very, again, different kinds of norms and very male-dominated. In today's world, even in the investment management and the wealth field, there are still very few female leaders. In fact, at the advisor level, there's less than 20% females as investment advisors in Canada. And so what I also learned was that the only way I could be a strong leader was to be authentic. And I believe in a philosophy called servant leadership. And that doesn't mean that you show up in the morning and polish your staff's shoes or bring them coffee to their desk. But what it means is that you lead with others in mind. And it's about creating an environment of trust. You're creating a long-term successful platform that people know that you're in their court. It's about having multiple voices that are heard. And so it's interesting because not too long ago I was thinking, it must have been a man that named it servant leadership. Because if you thought about if women were to create the work environment, what would they create? They'd create an environment of trust, they'd create a collaborative unit, and really that is what leadership is to me. And so initially I thought I had to change, but in the end I just was my authentic self.
And so that authentic self, Sarah, you know, you shared with me, and others have shared with me, that often women at work sometimes feel as though they really need to be sort of liked or maybe behave nicely in order to avoid being labeled as aggressive or bossy or pushy, while also not coming across as too affiliative. And so how can we move past these sort of cultural double standards in the workplace? What can we do to make a difference?
Well, I think we can always make a difference. I mean, that's part of it is just recognizing it, and to Lisa's point around authenticity, I think part of women in leadership and women in the workplace is really about trying to figure out, okay, is today the day that I'm supposed to have everyone like me? Is today the day where I'm supposed to be really tough? Is this just the decision where I'm supposed to dig in my heels? And we're always kind of trying to think outside in, as opposed to putting yourself there and thinking, okay, I am the right person for this decision. I am the right person to be leading this meeting. I am the right person to be doing what I'm doing here, and putting that out there. Because that is your authentic self. That's when you're living with high EQ. That's when you're able to really make a difference, whether it's leading through disruption, it's making, forging past like Gianna's doing. You have to do that with that full confidence and knowing that you're really operating as as the individual that you are, because that's how we're all made. We're not robots. We all bring our individual strengths to the table, and when we can truly leverage them and truly use them to our advantage and to our company's advantage, that's when we're going to be successful. So it's amazing when you start to clear away, and you never do it 100% of the time, but when you start to clear away that internal dialogue sometimes around, should I be saying this, should I be standing up like this, should I be using my body language in this way, and you're just really kind of flowing in the moment, you actually do your best work. And when you're doing your best work, you're going to be successful.
So do you believe then that people are actually, or realize that people are watching you? Are people paying attention?
Sure, all the time, of course. Look at right now.
Only about 1,400 right now. But yeah.
And it is tough because it's easier to say, if the culture doesn't fit you, then maybe you should, find the culture that does. And it's tough, because, we all have, families, livelihoods, things like that, career aspirations. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like too much, to be truly living and being genuine that way. It's just the advice is that when you find that, and when you're in it, when you're in the culture that allows you to be truly authentic in that way and lead authentically, it's amazing how much more successful you can be. You get outside what we just said, comfort zone box, that type of thing, right? And suddenly it's it's amazing what you can accomplish and what your team can accomplish.
And that's an interesting thing as well, right? So not only us and what we're doing, but the impact that we have on our team.
Sure. I mean, that's what it comes down to as well. I mean, it's, we're talking about women in leadership and the upside to that. There's a tremendous financial, economic, corporate upside to it as well. If we're truly bringing the best talent up through that corporate pipeline because we are tapping into both our female and our male potential leaders, we're going to be more successful as an organization. And it's getting harder and harder in many of our industries, in this room especially, to forge that path of success. And so if we can do that through talent, through having the best talent in the game, by going, by being diversified with our gender and with our visible minorities and people with disabilities, then we're gonna do better than everybody else, and that's the name of the game.
And so, clearly, the hope, obviously, from what I'm hearing from you, is to have a tremendous impact on people. But Megan, you've shared with us as well that people have had a tremendous impact on you. Can you name someone who's had that tremendous impact on you as a leader, and why did they, and how did this person impact your life?
Well, I alluded to earlier that I have had the good fortune of having a couple of strong female mentors that, I didn't even know that I needed a mentor when they were taking me under their wing back in the 1986 or whatever it was. But I'll share a funny one, and then so this woman was a trailblazer. I mean, she was in corporate finance. She was one of the only female leaders in the workout group. That's the bad loan group in the bank. And she led male-dominated teams her whole life. But I remember she said to me, Megan, this is, 20 years ago. She said, Megan, you need to quit walking through the plus 15 in your 4-inch heels because you aren't going to be able to walk when you're 50. And go buy those Manolos or those Louboutins now. So as you can see, I'm sitting here with flats on because I didn't listen to her. And but she was fantastic. Because we were, I was the sort of protege and she was the lead, she taught me some very simple things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise really kind of thought of. And, we were out with some private equity and it was always a gang of guys and there's all kinds of nonsense that goes along with that. She says, we're going to go because we need to be seen, we need to be heard, but then we are going to leave at 7 o'clock. And I said, okay. But I think that's really good advice that I can give some of the young women in the room is that, it's okay to go have a drink with the gang after work, but, know the time to leave. Know the time, be appropriate, don't cross the line. Otherwise, then you're fighting other things within your own personal brand that are probably completely untrue, right?
So when you say don't cross the line, help me understand a little bit more what you mean by that. Your line or a line that's defined for you?
Your own personal line, right?
Okay.
So it's okay to have fun and enjoy your colleagues and have fun, but it's just, be mindful of that because it does have some representation of your personal brand, which can be misconstrued for sure. On the personal side of the equation, my grandmother was a tremendous force. She's passed almost a year ago. She was 95, and she was head of munitions distribution out of London in World War II. And holy cow, could I learn a few things from her. And it was a purposeful task because all the men were fighting and they were, sent off to war. But, it's about being, again, your authentic self and, making sure that you show up, you're vested in these people. Don't ask people to do things that you wouldn't do. Don't say things that sound all airy-fairy. Just give people the straight goods and they'll respond much more favorably. They'll know where they stand and they won't feel that they're walking on eggshells around you. So that was also really good advice.
So thank you for that, because knowing where that line stands, knowing that these examples are out there for you, Gianna, if we're talking about our personal brand, if we're talking about authenticity and what we really stand for, as a leader, there are many expectations that are placed on your shoulders, on all of our shoulders as leaders and women in leadership. What role have your personal values played for you in managing these expectations, sort of navigating that career path in your own personal brand?
Well, I'm a strong believer in starting with yourself. And starting with yourself means knowing who you are, knowing what your personal priorities are. They're your personal priorities, they're your values. And it's back to being authentic, know where your lines are. And so for me, leading is everything to do about who I am and the place that I come from, and those lines that I won't cross, those personal values. And there are a number of them that come into play in different situations, but the two that have really seen me through, I'll call it, my North Stars, if you will. One is just my personal integrity. You talk about transferable skill sets when you move from one role to another, and when we look at talent, we look at how someone has a particular skill that can be applied differently. I think integrity and personal integrity is the thing that I know that I have no matter what. And it can't be taken away. I can give it away if I choose something that's uncomfortable for me. So I've always just used sort of the look in the mirror test. I think about when I've been placed in situations of challenge or, quite frankly, ethical dilemmas or integrity dilemmas in a variety of circumstances in my career. I always thought, I will know. Maybe nobody will find out, but I will know. And is this something that I would look back and say that I was proud of, or is this something that I would not want to share? And if I wouldn't share this, and if I couldn't look in the mirror and look at myself in the eye and said I did the right thing, then that's a sign. And I know that's where my line is. And so that's kind of what I do internally in terms of my personal ethics. The other is another strongly held value for me is just respect. It goes back to the servant leadership concept. I'm very much of that school, and everyone deserves respect. It's not about positional authority. It's not about a title. It's not about what they wear. People are human, and I start with that very basic concept of everyone deserves respect. I think back around to the dinner table when I was a kid, and my dad would come home and he would talk about these young upstart engineers that he had to work for that came out of university, and suddenly they were his boss. And I remember being so angry at them because I was like, that's my dad. My dad was like my hero. And I became that person. At 23 years old, I became a supervisor as a young engineer at a university over people who were 3 times my age. And I thought about those people going home to their families. And so I'm kind of get choked up because I think about my dad, but it's about respect. And you never lose that. I never lose that. I start every day with that with everybody that I deal with, and I end every day. So those are two of the values that I lead by, and I walk that talk every day. At least that's my goal.
Wow, that is beautiful, because that is my mother, Alice Margaret Foster Williams, raised us with respect, and respect was simply to treat people the way you wanted to be treated. And so I lived my life that way until my mid-40s, and I realized how disrespectful that was. And so as I grew and developed, I realized that the golden rule, as my mother had taught me, was great in its time, but I needed to grow and develop even more. And if I treated people the way I wanted to be treated, that was potentially really disrespectful, because it wasn't necessarily the way they wanted to be treated. So my mother doesn't even know it, but she's raised me well to know, to grow and develop and to learn from those. So Lisa, for yourself, how do you continue to grow and develop?
Well, I think as a leader in particular, we never really reach that mastery level. We're always growing. But what I would say to everyone is that in order to grow and develop, is you have to be vulnerable. And Brene Brown, who's an expert in this area and a fabulous author, she says that vulnerability isn't about being weak. Vulnerability is about having the courage to be yourself and having the courage to step outside your comfort zone. And that's really important. And so in order to grow and learn, I really embrace feedback. It's kind of cliche, but the gift of feedback, it truly is. And most organizations have 360-degree feedback now for leaders, and I really do listen to it. My first time I received feedback over 20 years ago, I actually went home, sat in the car in my driveway and cried. But I don't do that anymore because I really see that it's about my behavior. It's not who I am as an individual. And so then I have to rethink some of the actions I've taken. And so that's really, to me, it's about continuing to be vulnerable, because then you continue to learn and grow.
Thank you, thank you. And so oftentimes getting that feedback is difficult, as we've already shared. I mean, I surveyed, not quite 100 individuals to learn my lesson around the difference between a lady and a woman, and I've now got my lesson, but I had to look hard for that. The gift was last night. Sarah, though, you've had mentors, I believe, and so how have mentors impacted your career with different stages, if you will? Even more importantly, how could I have found one to give me the answer rather than surveying the 50?
Well, actually, I'll veer off what I was planning on saying, because just from this topic that we were talking about around how we treat others and kind of learning that either early or somewhere along the way in your career, very early on, I worked for someone who was a mentor of mine, and he really instilled in me many different lessons, but some things that resonate today are, always get to know the executive assistants, always talk to people who are in positions of less power than the people that you're trying to get to, because they're the ones who actually are running their schedules and owning their time and things like that. So little things around, obviously there's big themes and things that people teach you around, around leadership and around, the industry that you're in, and some of the nuts and bolts things that you learn over the years from different people. But it's amazing how some of the small lessons like that stay with you years and years later, and even if you don't understand it at the time, even if you just look at it as, okay, fine, this will get me what I want today, you learn years later it's actually about respect. It's about, learning that, get to know people for who they are, and eventually you might get what you want, right? But it's important. It's important that, especially for women, regardless of age or stature or where you're at in your career, to find those mentorship or sponsorship opportunities, because it's difficult. They just seem to happen more naturally for men with other men. It's just, it's a, whatever it is, it's a bias or it's just easier. And for women, we have to ask, or we have to find, or we have to get into a program, as we mentioned earlier, with women in leadership programs, to make that happen, because the lessons are not just the ones that you can pick up in a book or pick up through sort of those typical traditional means. It's in conversations. It's sometimes having a drink at 6:30, not after 7, but where you pick up these sort of nuggets of information that hopefully someone else can pass along to you.
And so have you found that mentors challenged you to take risks you wouldn't have taken on your own?
Sure. I think in some ways with the best mentors, it can almost feel like it's a confidence injection, because they're believing in you and they're usually, in a position of greater authority than you are. So, hey, if this person thinks I can do it, then maybe I can do it, right? The other side of that coin too is when you talk about whether it's paying forward or being a mentor, is how much you get to learn too. I think that's the other side of the coin when we're talking about being a responsible leader, or being a leader who's trying to make the case for greater diversity, is that you learn a lot along the way too. You get to hear, a fresh perspective from someone who, hasn't been in the trenches for 20 years or something like that, right? And who maybe is looking at things from a different perspective, and that's an awesome opportunity too for those of us who are fortunate enough to be in senior leadership positions already.
And so the risk definitely has a reward then, in that you learn more about yourself, that growth and development. But Megan, what's one of the biggest risks that you've taken?
I think it's actually most recently. So I've been in my profession for well into 30 years, and I made a change a couple of years ago, and I really thought that I was going to just kind of ride into the sunset, and I had a really great role and supported boarded executive, but I was offered a challenge to build my own business. And I actually went to two mentors, and they're men, and I asked them, you know, what should I do this? You know, I explained my opportunity, and you know, I could take the easy way out and kind of slide out, you know, in the next couple of years, or do I take this on? Do I have the energy? Do I have the drive? I was second guessing all the things that I really was. But at any rate, when I had ultimately asked them the final question, should I do this? And they both said exactly the same thing, except one threw in a swear word, which I won't repeat. But they said, you've got to do this. You've got to do this. You're going to be your greatest challenge and your biggest reward. And it really is. So running your own business and taking on those challenges, forging new territory, building new teams, it's just incredibly gratifying.
Awesome. Well, we are here at a powerful day for me. For me, what's really a powerful day, and I hope it's even more powerful for others. So what's the future? What are you excited about? Maybe Lisa, you could start, and I'll ask each of you, what are each of you excited about? What's happening?
Well, I'm excited because just within our wealth industry, there's such a great opportunity for women moving forward. And so from a business perspective, I'm excited about seeing more and more women enter the field, become leaders within the field, and be entrepreneurial and drive their own businesses within our industry. And on a personal side, because the speaker right before lunch talked about play, on a personal side, I'm most excited in that I'm a competitive soccer player, and I just played in the World Masters in New Zealand, and I'm getting ready for the next one in Japan.
Wow. Congratulations. And if we are doing a recruitment drive for women in the financial industry, I would just like to make a quick plug for Caddy Kay. Those that aren't familiar with her book is called The Confidence Code. It is written towards women as well. And one of the biggest outcomes it talks about from a financial perspective is that male portfolios tend to be very spiked, peaks and valleys. The women's portfolios tend to have a constant climb and are really doing amazing returns for their clients and their investments. So thank you for that. Megan, what about for you?
Well, I think too that it's, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I have a daughter in university, and it's about really reflecting on, wow, what have we all accomplished as women to date, and what can we do to impact, you know, our future leaders of the world. And you know, there's this notion in Europe, particularly in the European private banks, that there's a responsibility of sponsorship as opposed to mentorship. And we all have to take responsibility that, you know, our mothers, our grandmothers gave us the footprint or the foundation to where we are today. So now we need to continue to push and you know, challenge the status quo respectfully, you know, be thought leaders in this space. We also need to, within our own organizations, challenge the ratio of women in you know, senior management all the way up the ladder. And I take full responsibility for that. And I have some of the greatest female leaders that work for me. Really proud of them. They're, you know, I think of one lady that's in the audience. I can't see her, but you know, I hired her when the day before she gave birth. There was absolutely no reflection on whether or not she was willing and able. She's a mom, and you know, I wait for her. She's the greatest talent. So when I think of people first, I don't even consider gender. I think of who's the right person for the role, and you go, girl. You know.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, full disclosure, this is day one back for mat leave for me, so wow. So I'm just excited to go back to work. No.
How are you feeling?
Awesome. No, it's a great first day. No, it's amazing. We have a great group. This could be every day. No, I've got a great group of people here from Shaw to be part of this for me. But I'm really excited from an industry perspective. We've got some great things that have happened to us over the past few years that have disrupted us, but it's amazing to see the path forward and to just imagine things in a completely different way than they have been maybe for the past 15, 20 years in the past. So it's great to be a part of something like that. So excited to, as I mentioned, get back to the job, but to come back with a slightly different perspective. Sabbaticals and time off gives you a little bit of opportunity to come back with a bit of a different point of view, not so stuck into the busyness and all the things that kind of swirl around us in our whirlwind day to day. So just excited to bring that freshness back and to get back into it with the group of people that I work with.
Thank you. And Gianna.
So I'm going to bring it right back to this moment. And you said, what, there's 1,500 people in this room?
Close to that.
Mostly women, which is an amazing crowd. So what I'm sitting here thinking about as I'm listening to all of these really inspiring women is what I'm really excited about is the power of the people in this room and the potential, if unleashed, if anyone comes away with one idea or makes one difference, positive difference as a result of today, think and imagine what can happen. Drawing it back to the conversations that we're starting to have, and you mentioned it earlier, I believe strongly about unleashing the power and the potential of women, but it's not just about us talking with ourselves. I think we're beginning to have some real conversations about that, but what's the role of men? And so my challenge to the group, I think many of you in this room, I have two sons, they're 14 and 16 years old. If you have young sons, you have grandsons, you have nephews or young men that you influence, my challenge to you is teach them. Teach them that women are their partners in life and in business and are capable or intelligent, and we aren't competition and we aren't all those other things that people think about. So I challenge people to go out and raise this next generation to be able to see and partner with the potential of women, and then I think we'll start to really make some progress.
Wow. And so this is the caliber of talent that you have here in the Calgary area. Please join me in thanking your local representation. Panel, thank you so much.